call the meeting to order. If you can note that all the commissioners are present.
So noted.
The minutes were sent out. If there's no corrections to the minutes, we have a motion and a second.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll go straight into the official action, Resolution 1349. We'll recognize Linda.
Commissioners, as you will recall, we have some of our large industrial and commercial customers who buy their natural gas from another supplier. They don't buy it from us. We simply transport it. The supplier has adjusted their rate schedules, and therefore we need to make a similar adjustment to ours, and I'll recognize Sherry Ottinger to read the details of that.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I am here today to discuss with you a recent change that the pipeline which serves the East Tennessee region made and how that change impacts KUB and our customers. Most of our natural gas customers do purchase their gas directly from KUB. Under this, KUB purchases the gas. We then arrange for that gas to be transported on interstate pipelines and then brought to Knoxville. And we receive that into our system. The point at which we receive that we will refer to as a city gate station. And from that point, of course, then it's delivered to homes and businesses. However, we do also provide transportation service, and several of our large commercial and industrial customers have chosen this service. And under this arrangement, they will each select their own supplier. That supplier is then responsible for purchasing the gas and ensuring that it is delivered to KUB City Gate. Then from that point, we're responsible for then taking the gas and delivering it to that customer. So that brings us to the reason for today's presentation. The natural gas pipeline which serves Knoxville is East Tennessee Natural Gas, and we will typically just refer to them as East Tennessee. They, like all other pipelines, expect the shippers on their system to remain in balance. They expect that the amount of gas leaving their pipe and entering KUB's system has been properly purchased and scheduled. Now, to the extent that imbalances occur, they will assess imbalance charges, and they may also assess unauthorized gas charges. And likewise, KUB has that same expectation for the suppliers that are delivering to transport customers on our system. We expect that that supplier will have purchased, scheduled, and delivered an appropriate amount of gas for each transport customer. To the extent that they do not do that, they can create an imbalance between KUB and East Tennessee. And because of this, KUB's transportation rate schedules have historically utilized the same calculation as East Tennessee's for assessing these charges. And it is beneficial for us to maintain that alignment. The specific change that East Tennessee made to their tariff was they incorporated an additional pricing point. So we are recommending to you today to make that same change to KUB schedules. Resolution 1349 would enable us to maintain the alignment with East Tennessee's charges. Again, we do believe that is beneficial for our system to do so. And if you approve this resolution today on first reading, we would schedule second reading for next month.
Anyone have any questions? No questions? Okay. Request a motion and a second for Resolution 1349 on first reading.
So moved.
Second.
Is anyone there want to speak on this motion? If not, Mr. Foley, could you please call roll?
Commissioner Askew. Aye. Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Pennell.
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson.
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Commissioner Warden.
Aye.
Resolution 1349 is passed on first reading.
We'll move on to the President's report. And we'll recognize the member.
Commissioners, as you will recall, you authorized us to issue debt on each of our systems, and Mark Walker's here to report on the sale of those bonds, and yes, very, isn't it?
Commissioners, you may recall last May you authorized KUB to issue revenue bonds for the purpose of funding utility system capital improvements for fiscal year 2017, and also authorized the sale of refunding bonds for the purpose of refinancing some existing water system debt that was sold back in 2009, and refinancing that at lower interest rates. as Ms. Roach stated, we sold those bonds last month, and I wanted to provide you briefly an overview of the results of the sale. In total, we sold $118 million in bonds on July 11th and July 12th last month. We actually split it up over 2 days just to try to gauge the appetite of the market for the sale of KUB bonds. We did have a lot of interest in the bonds. We received 8 bids on our water and wastewater bonds, both series of water bonds and the wastewater bonds, and then 7 bids on electric, 6 bids on gas. So as typical, there is a lot of interest for KUB debt in the marketplace. But of the $118 million, as $97 million was issued to fund our utility system, help fund our utility system capital budgets for fiscal year 2017. That included $40 million for electric, $25 million for water, $20 million for wastewater, and $12 million for natural gas. And then the $21 million was used to refinance water bonds that were sold back in 2009 at lower interest rates. So in addition to the good news about the number of bidders, what really the good news is that we were able to sell at rates much lower than we expected. Municipal bond rates are at historical lows, and I think we talked to our financial advisor, hit the sweet spot the days that we sold. But on the $97 million, the rates that we got range from 2.72% to 2.78%. And for 30-year bonds, that's really amazing. And you can see what we budgeted or put in our financial plans at 3.25%, so we saved about 50 basis points on the debt. And for the $97 million, that translates to $10 million in savings from what we had in our plans over the life of the bonds, and $7 million over the course of our 10-year funding plans specifically. So really good news. On the refinancing, those bonds sold at 2.06%, which they have a shorter duration because we were just replacing some 2009 bonds, year for year, essentially, and they mature in 2033. And it was, you can see 2.12% or 212 basis points lower than the current cost of that debt. And that saved $2.5 million over the life of the bonds, net of all fees, and $1.5 million over the 10-year plan. So good news. And the good news sort of keeps on coming because as part of our ratings process, as you know, we will work with the rating agencies, Standard & Poor's and Moody's for KUB. And we present them a utility system operations update and a financial condition update of all 4 systems. And as part of that discussion, the water system received an upgrade from Moody's from AA2 to AA1, which is their second highest rating available. And I don't know if you remember, but back in May I mentioned that I was going to ask for an upgrade for all the systems and just see what happens. I wasn't optimistic, but it actually came through for water. So again, the old adage, it never hurts to ask. And the AAA rating that the water system has from S&P was affirmed, as we really expected it would be. And then for the other 3 systems, electric, gas, and wastewater, their high ratings were also affirmed. So. And commissioners, this chart basically reflects the bond ratings for each of the 4 utility systems, broken down by S&P and Moody's. I also included a couple of comments directly taken from the rating reports, one from Moody's and one from S&P, just for your information. But just to point out, we already talked about water, that they have the highest rating from S&P, second highest rating from Moody's. Electric and wastewater at AA+, that's the second highest rating from S&P. Gas at AA is the third highest rating from S&P, but I'll tell you, S&P does not rate any other public gas system higher than AA, and they told us that. And on the Moody's side of it, we talked about AA1 for water. For electric, gas, and wastewater, it's AA2, which is their third highest rating. Moody's also told us on AA2, just like S&P, that's the highest rating that they make available or will assign to a natural gas system. So I think just in summary on this particular slide, that the high quality ratings do reflect the well-managed operations of all 4 systems and also reflect the strong financial conditions of all 4 systems as well. In addition, I think it's noteworthy to tell you that in the rating reports, they specifically point out the leadership of the board of the governing body of KUB in setting the vision and in funding the utility system infrastructure programs, the commitment to do that, because as I think you know, that is not common across our nation. So they point that out, and also not only funding it, but doing it in a fiscally responsible manner as well. So if you ever want to see those reports, I'll be happy to provide them to you. And now, moving on to somewhat maybe the boring part of the presentation. I have the next 10 slides are slides that information that I'm required to, in the public meeting, to tell you about. So I'll try and go quickly, but it's details about each sale of each series of bonds, and then also a summary of the debt profile of each division. So we'll start with water. These are the bids on the $25 million in water bonds. Low bid was 2.72% from Barclays Capital. You can see we did get 8 bids. The spread between the low and the high was around 20 basis points. On the water refunding bonds, as we mentioned, 2.06%, low bid, Citigroup Global, spread about 35 basis points on those particular bonds. And then looking at the water division bond profile, where do we stand after these 2 sales? We have $170 million in outstanding bonds in total for the water division. That translates to a debt ratio of 51% at this point in time, though we're at the very beginning of the fiscal year. At the end of the fiscal year, I anticipate it'll be in probably the mid-40s. Once you get more earnings for the year, that figures into your calculation. So that will go down by the end of FY17. The interest associated with the $170 million is $85 million in interest cost, and you can see all the debt service, it extends over a 30-year period. For wastewater, $20 million in bonds we sold. The low bid was 2.74%. Robert W. Baird investment banking firm was the low bid. The spread also about 20 basis points. And looking at the wastewater division, as you know, this is the division that we have the highest amount of outstanding debt. Right now with this sale, we have $512 million in outstanding bonds that mature, really going out as far as 2050 for wastewater. The interest obligation on that debt is $315 million. So total debt service for wastewater right now is $827 million. The debt ratio is 65%, and that drop is at the upper limit that the board has really endorsed in our 10-year funding plan for the wastewater division. And another factor that we look at in our debt management policy is how much of the debt is repaid over the next 10 years. Wastewater is required to pay at least 20% over the next 10 years, and it gets at 26%. Moving on to electric real quick, we received 7 bids on the electric bonds, $40 million. The low bid was Hutchinson Shockey, their investment banking firm out of Chicago. Spread, the electric and gas bonds were sold on the Tuesday, July 12th. Interesting that the spreads on those days narrowed as compared to the first day, for what that's worth, but the basis spread was like 10 basis points on the electric bonds. And looking at the electric bond profile, right now we have $278 million in outstanding bonds for electric. That's a debt ratio of 45%, which is in line with our 10-year funding plan. Total interest cost $121 million. And then the last series of bonds, $12 million in natural gas bonds, low bid 2.78. 6 bidders for gas bonds, and typically we'll get the fewest amount of bids on the gas bonds. Just inherently, they look at the gas industry as being a little bit more risky. But the spread was really narrow at only 5 basis points. And then for the gas division, $114 million in total outstanding debt, a debt ratio of 37%, $41 million in interest costs. One thing to point out, this is the first bond issue we've had in gas since the board endorsed a funding strategy of doing bonds over 30 years as opposed to 20 years. And that's why you see the new bonds go out further than the existing bonds. And then my last slide, just providing some detail on the issuance cost or professional fees associated with the sale of the bonds. As we've talked in the past, our financial advisor is Cumberland Securities. Bond counsel is Bassberry and Sims. The fees that we pay both of those firms are established per contracts we have with both firms. And I'll say that those rates that we pay are competitive. We did a survey about a year ago of other large issuers in the region, and our rates are very competitive. We also pay Moody's and S&P to review and assess and rate our debt. And you can see the fees that we pay them, and of course that's for the 5 series of bonds, actually 5 ratings. In total, $570,000. That, when you compare that to the par value of the bonds, it's less than 0.5%, which is competitive when you look across the industry. That concludes my comments. Again, just like to summarize by saying we were really pleased with the rates and pleased with the rating upgrade. We do have about $55 million in bonds that would be scheduled to be refunded sometime in the spring. So we'll be back unless rates shoot up dramatically, which I don't anticipate happening at this point in time. Of course, anything can happen. And that would provide savings of about $7 million. We can't do that right now because those bonds aren't callable until the summer of 2017. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Not a question, but just a comment. I just want to say, I think that you and your staff and really all the management of KUB to be congratulated on the upgrade, because it's never been easy to go out and get an upgrade. And since all the grief that the rating agencies took on the housing collapse back in 2008, I can only imagine it's got to be more difficult now than it used to be. So that's something to really be proud of.
Thank you.
Mark, she's got a little.
Oh, yes, thank you. I knew I'd forget. Commissioner Thompson is holding up the official statement for the bonds. Another requirement of state law is that we present that, make that available to the board at a public meeting. You're certainly free to take it with you if you want your own copy.
Yeah, the newbie needs
It's
to
only
do
like
that.
700 pages.
That's right, I'll look for next meeting.
And at the very back, I'm also have to tell you, behind that blue sheet, that there is a schedule of all the issuance costs, most of which I just went over with you on professional fees. The only thing different is the underwriter's discount is included on that report. But
Who has to sign it saying they understand it?
I actually have to sign it. So.
But he doesn't understand.
He definitely
I
has.
don't understand it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, as you know, we get our wholesale electricity from TVA, but TVA also has another very important role, and it's a regulatory role. Generally, we like to hold that afar, but we have mutually agreed with TVA to expand their regulatory role in one area because it's to our advantage. So I've asked Mike Boland to explain this whole thing to you.
Thank you. As Ms. Roach said, TVA, as you recall, TVA is a regulator of KUB. If you go back to the founding act that created TVA, one of the mandates for TVA is to provide rates to customers at the lowest feasible rates. TVA implements that mandate by having provisions in the wholesale power contract with distributors like KUB that gives them regulatory authority over us. They implement that by having oversight of a number of different policies embedded within our service to customers. For example, and these are just broad categories, but our accounting policies, they tell us what chart of accounts to use when we book our assets and liabilities. They tell us on the customer service side, give us broad guidelines on how we can collect deposits from customers. What are the shut-off provisions for customers? How do we classify our customers as residential versus commercial? They broad guidelines there on customer service policies. They get into internal allocations. For example, my salary, I work not only for the electric division, I also work for the gas division. So the allocation of my portion of my salary that goes to electric customers is in a broad sense overseen by TVA as part of their authority here. Use of funds, TVA makes sure that the electric distributors don't use their funds inappropriately from the TVA viewpoint of the world. For example, more recently, they just sent out a notice to remind all distributors that during the political season, electric funds are not to be used to advance political campaigns, for example. It would be an inappropriate use of funds. So TVA has a very large and broad oversight of KUB and how we do business. And it's not really just on the electric side, since they are telling us how we do our business, how we book our funds, how we get deposits from customers and classify customers. They really influence the gas division, they influence the water division, they influence the wastewater division as well. So it's not just an electric when you think about TVA. This relationship with TVA has been since the foundation of TVA and KUB back in the 30s. So we've grown up for 70-something years with a relationship with TVA where they oversee us, if you will, on a regulatory scheme. So there's a long-term working relationship between distributors and TVA that I think that's served us very, very well. I'm almost fixing to switch horses now, so bear with me. If we jump all the way back to 2003, you may or may not recall there was a big blackout that occurred up in New York City. I guess it was the most affected that people recognized at the time. But in 2003, there was a tree in a right-of-way of a big transmission line in Ohio that got into a transmission line. And from that tree in one transmission line, it ultimately took out electric service to about 40 million people. That included Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. It cascaded up into Canada, and that was called the Northeast Blackout. At the time, there were a lot of satellite photography made. This happened during a hot summer afternoon. It extended all the way through that night, the next day. There was some satellite photography showing the Northeast, showing the United States at night, and the Northeast was all dark. I mean, it was really pretty dramatic if you go back. But in any event, after that blackout that occurred, Congress got involved. And Congress gave the authorities to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, saying, you are responsible going forward for electric reliability. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is the organization that Sherry and Mark would deal with on the gas side. The FERC, as we call them. FERC also deals with power, but in our environment, they typically don't. But anyway, FERC wasn't necessarily the right person to deal with that. The more logical person to deal with it, they contracted with it to some extent, which is a North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or called NERC. Their whole existence and their whole purpose is a reliability organization that makes sure all the participants in the bulk power market behave well and interact appropriately. So FERC turned around and gave the authority for reliability standards that came from Congress, gave it to NERC. Now, NERC is the organization that's responsible for coming up with these standards. Then they take these standards to FERC, and FERC blesses them. So FERC is still in charge, but NERC's the one that's implementing these things. So over time, since 2007, I guess is when the first came out. Since 2007, the regulations that have come out of this whole chain of events have changed. Over time, there have been more outages. There was an outage in 2011 that started in Arizona, that cascaded across over, took out San Diego, went south of Baja Peninsula of Mexico, also incorporated the part of Mexico right south of Arizona as well. Every time there's an event like that, typically more standards, more regulations will come out of those. So they've always been evolving standards associated with reliability. The kind of standards that they come out are typically complex. They're technical and usually expensive. They're interested in your maintenance, in your the way you deal with issues on widgets and parts that affect the power system. And when I talk about the power system, I'm talking about service to your house. This is a power system where power is flowing between states. This is the bulk electric system. That's where they have an interest in. As all this has evolved and all this has come about, we've been working hard as an organization to make sure, number one, we understand what the regulations are, And number two, that as we have some of these parts that are now subject to regulation, that we are taking the appropriate steps to do the appropriate maintenance and comply with the regulations. As the regulations came out in 2007, and ever since 2007, distributors like KUB have worked with TVA to understand what the regulations are, because all these regulations really are about the TVAs and the Dukes and the Southern Companies and the ComEds and the SoCal Edisons of the world. They're in the business of moving power between states. You know, we become involved where our systems touch TVA. That is where we take power from TVA. At that interface between us and TVA, we have some level of responsibility for these reliability standards. So ever since this started, KUB and other distributors have worked hand in hand with TVA to understand this. TVA have people that sit on the committees that develop these standards. TVA have people whose whole jobs are knowing about these standards. So they've been involved with us from the very start. As the standards have grown more and more complex, and as the standards have rolled down from the largest customers to where they now even affect the KUBs of the world, TVA offered to register with NERC and become responsible for the compliance of these reliability standards for distributors like KUB. Starting July 1st of this year, KUB entered into a contract with TVA, as did other distributors, that set TVA up as our regulatory authority for these reliability standards, and they will be the responsible entity to NERC for compliance with these standards. Councilor Coley there reviewed the agreement, and the agreement actually has a lot of detail within it that says that we will test these things, we will document our tests, we will do all these things. We're applying the same reliability standards to us under TVA as we would as if we were under NERC. TVA is somebody we're used to dealing with. TVA is somebody we have a partnership with in a lot of areas. So it made a lot of sense for our customers to have to contract with TVA. At the end of the day, it's a beneficial relationship for us to see regulatory authority to TVA this way. Again, we have a relationship with TVA. For example, TVA is coming in and hosting a regional meeting at our facilities in September, training distributors about here's what you need to do to comply. If we were dealing with NERC, we'd be dealing with our attorney versus NERC's attorney. It's just a different relationship when we deal with TVA. So building on our existing relationship is a real positive thing. In TVA's case, they're already in this business. They're already on all the committees. I think it really does help strengthen their relationship with us when they're out here actually helping us in our business. And finally, NERC itself was really set up, and the rules were really set up, again, for the TVAs and the Dukes and the Southern Companies of the world, not for individual towns. So it's actually an advantage to NERC as well, and NERC had to agree to all this to start with. So everybody's in agreement here. It's beneficial for our customers. It's a recent transaction, and we just want to make y'all aware. So that's my presentation. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you.
Just curiosity, is TVA taking on this role for the whole country or just in their service area?
Just in the, I'm sorry, just for distributors in their service territory. Yes, sir.
How does EPA interface with TVA from a regulatory standpoint?
EPA has authority over TVA, but they are both federal agencies, and you get into federal agencies loggerheads from time to time, but TVA is subject to EPA actions just the same way we are. They are. Nothing else. Thank you very much.
Some more good news. In September, we are rolling out a new website. Our current website has had its challenges, and we're very excited about a new one. I recognize Mark Kenner, who's going to not only provide the presentation, but to share some of the credit for this with some of his folks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am here to talk about our new website. I know you've seen a couple of previews over the last few months, so we're going to get into it. But before I do, I'm looking for some folks. I want to talk about, we've got 3 people here that represent the entire team of individuals that worked on this website. So the first one is Mindy Corn. Mindy, stand or raise your hand or something. Mindy is responsible for all of our content. So the words you see, the pictures, the images, the look and feel, the fabric of that website all comes from Mindy or through Mindy. Dwayne Lane is our lead developer here at KUB. So Dwayne and his team, all of the code necessary to make the self-service transactions work and come to life, Dwayne and his team made that happen. And then Ellie Pratt, Ellie's our project manager. So she wrangled all of our teams, our development team, content, test team, security teams, our infrastructure team, all of those different groups, and brought them together on the same path where we ended at the same place at the end of the day, managed the schedule, the budget, and all of our tasks. So that's, those 3 are responsible, they're representing all the individuals responsible for what we're going to see here. Back in March, John Williams and Leslie Hartzell were here talking about the customer engagement initiative that we've run this year. They shared the results and some insight into that initiative with you. And I know they stated it, but I wanted to reiterate it. Our customers, they feel that we care about them and that we want to do a good job, but they also think we can do a better job on occasion. And you can see that here with some of the highlights I've put on these bullet items. So remember this slide for the future. The website team, within the framework of the project, executed 3 customer focus groups. One was executed by our partner, our design partner that we utilized, and I'll talk about them in a moment. The other 2 were executed here in Knoxville with our customers. And you can see some of the feedback here. We use terms that are meaningful to us, like select pay. I know what that means. It's a one-time bank draft, pay your KUB bill. But we, on our website, expect customers to know what select pay means. Navigation is too complex. On our homepage of our website, current website, there's over 60 links to jump off that website to something else. 60 opportunities to go find something. So it is